questions about was about cultural competency. So I noticed that oftentimes when people talk about medicine to different groups of people, we're all talking about medicine from one view, which is like the standard Western medicine, like do surgery, do pills, do like, things like that to make yourself feel better. Oftentimes people are not aware that different cultures have various perspectives of medicine. So for example, like Chinese medicine or like Native American medicine, like they all have very different aspects. And I realized that during my free clinics that I would host at TMHBB, that the material that's given out by the federal government oftentimes will exclude minority groups. For example, when you go talk about diabetes and things like that, they'll tell you, don't eat fat, don't eat sugar, like stay away from salty foods, like stuff like that. Like no hamburgers, no fries, things like that. But oftentimes, I mean, you can probably tell I'm Asian. Asian people will look at that and be like, oh, I don't eat burgers or fries, I'm fine. But then actually behind the scenes, their foods are filled with soy sauce or like fish sauce or things like that. And that stuff is what contributes to diabetes, hypertension, and things like that. So I wanted to bring my experiences from various cultures and exposures to different cultures into my education as a medical doctor, and hopefully into the future as I pursue public health. So my medical school timeline, like I said, I went to UC San Diego from 2013 and I graduated in 2017. I took a gap year. I worked as a medical assistant and emergency department scribe and studied for my MCAT up till when I took it in January 2018. I applied for a post-bac program. It's at Keck Graduate Institute in Claremont, California. It started in August 2018. It was a one-year program, so I graduated in May 2019. I applied for medical school in June 2019, and then while I was in the cycle, I pursued a master's at the same graduate university. I got into medical school in October of 2019, and I started medical school this year. So total, it was about 3 gap years. So why did I do a post-bac? Well, long story short, my grades were bad. They were not that bad where I could have probably gotten into a PA school or DO school, but I did not want that for myself. I realized that I felt like I had so much more to offer, and I wanted to present myself in the best way possible when I applied for medical school. I had an upwards trend in undergrad. So like what most undergrad students come in, they kind of have a lower grade in the first year because they're getting used to the curriculum and stuff like that. Something personal happened to me, which caused my grades to drop severely in my second and third year. And then my grades bounced back up on the 4th year, but unfortunately it was unable to, you know how grades work. Once you have a bad grade, it basically drops everything like a lot. So I decided that I wanted to do a post-bac. So I did a post-bac at KGI, and it was a graduate level post-bac, meaning that the grades that I got from that post-bac would be a separate grade from the undergrad grades that I got from UCSD. The graduate grades that I got, I decided to do that because I was a human biology major already at UCSD, meaning that I already fulfilled all the prerequisite requirements. I already did most of the science classes that I could take for to apply for medical school. So there was no point in me doing an undergraduate post-bac because there was so few classes that I could even additionally take that would bump up my science GPA. So I did the one at KGI. And I also decided to stay for a second year at the grad school to finish a master's in business and science. I did it as a plan B because in the case that I did not get into medical school in the 2019 to 2020 cycle, I could apply again, but this time with a master's. So that was my plan B. And then overall, I graduated from my grad school with a cumulative GPA of 3.98 and a science GPA of 4.0. Then as you can see, like it worked out well for me. I'm in med school right now. So I'm a huge proponent of doing a post-bac or master's or a special master's program. If you realize that your grades are not in the competitive realm or that you feel like what you have in your application so far doesn't represent your potential. So here are some tidbits of advice. For coming from somebody who's talked to who have a bunch of med school friends now, schools nowadays also seem to appreciate applicants with gap years. If you look at the average, most med school, like average matriculate age is around 24 to 25. The reason why is because they like to see maturity, more experience, and diversity within their applicants. Oftentimes they notice that when medical or pre-med students jump straight from undergrad into medical school, their perspective is a little bit different than people who've had gap years. So what I'm trying to get at this is don't worry about age. A lot of people are worried that because medical school is so long that, you know, you're going to be so old when you graduate, you know, stuff like that. I've heard it a million times, but like, don't worry about it. Focus on making your app like at your best. You don't want to apply with any regrets, right? It's such an expensive and long process. You want to make sure that it's at your tip-top shape before you apply for medical school, so that when you do get accepted, you're like, no regrets, this is the best place that I could have gotten into, I'm going, you know? And tidbits of advice, definitely network. So network with your advisors, your professors, students at the medical schools that you apply to, basically anyone and everyone. So especially because it's a little bit more difficult, I understand, because of COVID, everything is mostly virtual. Honestly, though, it doesn't mean that your opportunities have stopped. Oftentimes your professors will have office hours, right? And like chances are, how many of you guys actually go to your office hours in your university? I remember back then I didn't. So I know that chances are you guys probably didn't as well. I recommend you to just do it. Even if you have no questions to ask, just go, just so that you can build some kind of relationship with your professors. Because when it comes down to it, when you want to get your letters of recommendation, you want to be able to have a wide like pool of letters and network people that you can reach out to. Especially when it comes to letters of rec, you will, you probably already know this, but you need to have like one from a non-STEM, like humanities teacher, one or two from a STEM professor, one from volunteering, one from non-medical related volunteering, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, for your secondaries, people are super worried about applying to a million schools, like applying to all the schools. And honestly, I did make the same mistake. I applied to 50 medical schools because I was like, I want to cast my net far and wide. I want to, like, beggars can't be choosers. I'm applying to everything, everywhere, and I'll go to anywhere that accepts me. That was my mentality. And honestly, it bit me in the butt. Reason why is because when you apply to that many schools and they send you the secondaries, oftentimes they don't even look at your primaries before they send you secondaries. They send you their secondaries almost immediately for many of the schools, meaning that I basically had like an influx of secondaries from like 30 schools, or all at once. And then when it comes to secondaries, they'll tell you,
Huh?
Yeah, I know.
sorry, make sure
You want Maxine?
No. That's
um,
such a 7.
Everyone, can you guys just make sure you're muted? Thank you.
sorry about that. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so in regards to the secondaries, they'll tell you the due date is in October or August or something like that, when you've actually gotten it sometime in June, but that's basically a lie. What they want you to do is to submit it within a 2-week like range. So if you get it June 1st, submit it by June 15th. Basically anytime after the 2-week limit, you're basically put at the bottom of the pile. So that got me kind of messed up. It bit me in the butt because I had 50 schools now with all of these secondaries with probably 4 or 5 prompts, each with varying word limit, character limit. So it was almost impossible for me to submit all of those secondaries within the 2-week range and make them of quality, of quality content, basically. So I feel like if I could go back and tell myself, like, if I had to redo the process again, I would probably only apply to 20 schools. So this is my warning to you. Don't apply to like more than 35 because it's honestly not worth it. Chances are most of the places that you apply to, you wouldn't even go to. So make sure that when you do formulate your medical school list that you want to apply to, that it's actually schools that you would want to go to, that it fits like your mission, and that when you do the secondaries, it's within the 2-week range. So I will now go into some questions. I'll start off with some popular questions I saw in the list that was emailed to me. So why MD versus like PA, right? And this is actually a very common question that you'll get in your interviews. Oftentimes when medical schools, or when they interview you, they're gonna say, why medicine, right? And you can just think to yourself, I mean, I ask you, why do you wanna become a physician? If you think I want to help people, or like I want to help people get better, or I want to improve people's lives, things like that, you're not going to get into that medical school. And the reason why is because it's too broad. They're going to counter with like, why not nursing? Why not, PA? Or like, why not policeman? Why not bus driver? Why not like grocery store checkout people? Those are all people that help people. So make sure that when you do encounter that question, and 100% of the time you will encounter that question, that you have a very personal response as to why you want to become a physician. So for me, when I get asked the question, why MD over PA? Personally, this is more when it comes to a personality kind of thing. I see myself more as like a captain of my own ship. I want to have the responsibility, and I'm more than willing to shoulder that liability as well, to be able to direct my medical team into the improvement of my patient lives. And this is in the context of me becoming an emergency medicine physician. That's currently my interest. So I love PAs. PAs are amazing. They do so much for the medical team. They contribute so much. But in terms of MD, I also want to one day become a medical director. And eventually I do want to influence public health and things like that. And because of these goals, my future goals in mind, being a medical director is the best or the easiest way to achieve those goals. My advice to you guys when you guys encounter similar questions like this is to never, ever say anything that can sound any kind of detrimental towards a PA or like a DO. If you do any of that, like if you say like, oh, MDs get more training and they know more, or like, oh, they are like, they make more money, or, you know, like stuff like that, you're not going to get that position. So make sure, like, ultimately always treat these questions with a lot of respect and be very careful when you're answering these questions. So similarly to DO, I love DO medicine. I think holistic medicine is amazing. I agree with a lot of their teachings as well, but similarly to why I would choose MD over PA is because overall, when it comes to administrative leadership, as well as legislation, I would prefer, or it's easier to get that way through MD. I actually was planning on applying for DO school, but I applied to MD first. And then I told myself that if I did not get an acceptance to MD school by winter of 2019, then I'll submit my application for DO schools, because DO schools, like their timeline is a little bit longer than the MD schools. So personally, I would have no quarrel with being an MD versus a DO, but that's my personal choice. I had another question about what are some recommended extracurriculars. So my recommended, I don't have like a list of like, you must do shadowing, you must do volunteer. I don't have anything like that, but I do have a lot of genres. So obviously you want to have clinical, you want to have non-paid, and if you can, try to find paid clinical positions. you want to have some kind of leadership position as well. So like some medical org, or if you become leadership at like a clinic or something like that, you want to have those. Volunteering, and when I mean volunteering, I mean non-clinical volunteering. So volunteering at like a food shelter, or like volunteering with making or passing out masks during the COVID pandemic, things like that. And then mentorship. Mentorship is a big thing, but it's not mandatory among a lot of medical schools. A lot of medical schools like to see that you like to give back to the people who are younger than you, or people who are further behind you in the timeline and things like that, because it shows that you are somebody who likes to share your knowledge, that you're empathetic and things like that. And lastly, something that I always recommend is to put a hobby in your list of extracurriculars when you apply for medical school. Reason is being is it makes you seem more of a human. Remember, they're seeing your application before they interview you, and so they're reading through all your extracurriculars. They're reading like 50,000 like people who are talking about volunteering, shadowing, like all that stuff. It gets boring really quick. You become like, unfortunately, it gets really easy to see your application just become like a blend of every others. So when you talk about what a hobby, it makes you seem more like a person. And if you can relate that hobby some way into a passion or into a characteristic as to why you want to become a physician, that just gives you even more of a bonus. So for me personally, I actually wrote about music because I've been involved in like band, jazz band, marching band for years. Not anymore, unfortunately, but like for like over 10 years. So I put that into my hobby. I put it under artistic endeavor. And then I also had friends who talked about cooking. And then if you're into sports, you can talk about sports as well. And then I had a lot of questions about a theme in my application. So yes, try to have a theme in your application. So mine personally was revolving around cultural competency. Like I said before, I told you the whole story about why I thought cultural competency was so important. So that in my application, especially my personal statement, when I talked about different experiences, so I talked about my research in a public health startup, I related that into cultural competency. I also talked about my experience in emergency medicine. I talked about how cultural competency is important in that. So overall, like, you want to try to issue your application like a hashtag, kind of. So my hashtag would be cultural competency. The problem about medical school applications is that a lot of people get into a box checking mentality, right? So a lot of people, they act according to how they think medical schools want them to act. So they're like, okay, what looks good? Volunteering looks good, right? And then volunteering at a shelter looks good. And I'm gonna go shadow for like 10 different specialties. I'm gonna do all this, right? But the thing is, medical schools actually value longevity more than the variety of experiences you have. So what I mean is they like to see that you've done things for years, right? It shows that it actually means something to you, and that it actually like influenced your path in medicine, and that you actually have a passion for that thing. So for me, a lot of my things were for years. So for example, my team HBV thing, it was 4 years in undergrad, and then I also started up in my grad school. So that's an additional like 2 years. So I had 6 years of that. And then I worked at an emergency scribe for over 2 years, et cetera, et cetera. They want to see that you've done things for a while. Don't just scatter your application with 15 things that you've done for like 2 weeks. That doesn't look good, because it kind of just makes you seem like, yeah, you're just checking the boxes. And then lastly, in terms of a theme, the theme, it should really revolve around you. And what I mean by you is what drives you, what makes you want to become a physician. What kind of physician do you want to be? Or what kind of personal link do you notice, like in your personality, that makes you so passionate about these experiences that you've had? And then so a lot of what comes into your theme will revolve about you really thinking about yourself. Like do some meditation, do some deep thinking, and then just really focus about like, yeah, what drives you? Like what makes studying for all these years worth it, right? Okay, so that's all the main questions I saw on the list that was sent out to me. Hopefully in my presentation, I was able to address some of the questions. I'm not sure how much time, I think we have like 30 minutes or so to do a Q&A panel. So if you have a question, just to keep it orderly, if you could write your name in the chat, and then I'll call your name, and then you can unmute yourself and then ask your question. All right, so if anybody has a question, please go ahead and write your name in the chat. Otherwise, I'll be here. Oh, okay, we have a first one. So Hamsini, hopefully I pronounced your name right.
Yeah, thank you so much for like the presentation. I was just wondering, you said that you took a gap year and then worked as a medical assistant and a scribe, right? So how did you become a medical assistant? Because a lot of the applications that I've looked into for a medical assistant typically involve like doing some kind of course for a certain period of time. So
yeah, so yeah, I've actually heard that a lot, and I know that a lot of places offer like medical assistant certificates or like things like that. I actually started off with medical, or I actually did not do any of that. I started by trying to reach out to doctors that I knew. So for example, I actually reached out to like my parents' doctors, my like auntie's doctors, my uncle's doctors, and I tried to reach out to them through my parents and my relatives to see if I could like hand them my resume that way. And then ask if they would be willing to train me, or if they would just be willing to take me as an intern first. So I wasn't a medical assistant at first at that clinic. It was a primary care clinic, by the way. I originally started just as a front desk worker. And then as I was there, because I was there for about a year, after a month or so, I started to, the other medical assistants there started to train me, and I learned that way. It is possible to find positions where they train you there. It is more difficult though. So that's why when I say like networking is so important, it's because you want to be able to try to see if you can get your foot in the door that way. Hopefully that was able to help.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. All right, Natalie.
Hi, so thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I actually really enjoyed the portion of your talk that specifically explained your enthusiasm towards policy.
Mm-hmm.
I am honestly in between at the moment. I do know that I want to pursue medicine, but also policy and activism calls me a lot. And I can see that in the different leadership positions I have at my college. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on pursuing an MPH before going to medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And like specifically, I know that you said that you do want to implicate public health. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll try to answer the first part of your question first. So the MPH before medical school. So I think that is a wonderful thing. Like if you want to do like a master's before postbac, which I actually have a lot of friends who did that instead. I think that's amazing because first off, it gives you an additional degree on your application. It'll give you a lot more things to talk about when you have your interviews. And it'll just make you, basically you'll be different than most of the other pre-med people who are applying straight out of undergrad. I also think it will give you like a different perspective into community health and community medicine, which is very attractive to many medical schools as well. Hopefully that answered the first part of your question. In terms of the second part of your question, so are you talking about like my personal, like what I want to do with public policy?
Yes, I would love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, okay, so this also aligns with my interest into emergency medicine. Oftentimes, you'll notice that emergency medicines are very crowded. And the reason why is because a lot of people who are of lower socioeconomic status, or they're unable to afford things and or insurances and things like that, rely on emergency medicine as their primary source of healthcare, which it shouldn't be. oftentimes emergency rooms are labeled as the safety nets of the community because, like, you know, when you don't have money and you have suicidal intentions, ideations and things like that, like, where do you go? You go to the emergency room, right? What I love about the emergency room is that no matter how rich or poor, no matter what kind of insurance you have, the emergency room will take care of you. That's what I love about it. And oftentimes I've noticed that a community revolves around the hospital. And my goal was to be emergency physician and then work my way into medical director. And then one of my goals was to own a chain of urgent cares. And then one day maybe run one of the hospitals I work at. That's the goal. By becoming somebody who is higher up in the like healthcare administrative ladder, your voice is a little bit more influential, especially when it comes to public health legislation. My goal is to try to push legislation more towards universal healthcare. I really doubt it's going to happen anytime during our lifetime. It's the way that our government is right now. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think it's possible to push things gradually towards that. So make, you know, vaccines mandatory for everybody, implement more public health education, start with more nutritional education, like programs, remove, like, or try to get rid of food deserts, things like that, that could, like, things that stems from the community should be improved upon so that it could like better impact the community members, and then will ultimately benefit like our whole United States, like, spendings on the in terms of healthcare. Sorry, that was kind of like awkwardly worded, but my goal is to basically start from the community and then work my way up and eventually start influencing legislation and then hopefully make a national impact that way. When you're a physician, especially if you have a master's of public health, not only do you have the medical education, but you also have the education or the knowledge of the community that you're in. So when you actually have more of a say when you go and lobby towards the lawmakers. So that's why, like, I wanted to go into that field. Hopefully I was able to answer your question.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely to hear from someone else who has, who is farther ahead, I guess, in their career goals than I am, because I do express similar aspirations to the ones that you have. It kind of does seem unappealing to some people as they feel that I should become more of a lawyer instead of a doctor. And I think that the way that you articulated yourself, it really perfectly condensed everything in what I want to do with policy and medicine. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, something that I love a lot about the MD MPH program is when it comes to MD, it's usually just you and the patient in front of you. But when it comes to MPH, it's you and, like, the community around you. So if you really think about it, like, you can honestly combine them together to help more people than just the patient in front of you. And that's why I like the program so much.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Of course. Next up, we have Sevara.
Hi, thank you for sharing your experiences. I have a question about, I think it's more personal, like it's a personal question to me, but I don't know if you'd be able to answer it. So I'm really passionate about mental health, and I want to incorporate that into, like, medicine, and I want to be a surgeon. And if I do mention that in my application, I'm afraid that they're probably going to ask me, why didn't you go into psychology as opposed to being a doctor? So how would I go about incorporating psychology, mental health into being a physician?
Well, oftentimes you will learn as you go further in your medical training that mental health actually has a lot of effect in your the physical aspects of your body, right? So, I mean, it also depends on how you phrase it on your personal statement. So from what I've learned so far in my medical training, that like anxiety, depression, and things like that releases, you know, stress hormones and things like that, that actually affects all the organs in your body. And therefore it presents as like real physical symptoms. You could probably relate things like that way. And then I doubt they would say, why not be a psychologist? They might ask, why not be a psychiatrist? How do you pronounce it? But you know what I mean? Like a medical doctor that focuses on mental health and things like that. It's a specialty, actually. So you might need to consider how you would personally answer between surgeon versus a psychiatrist. I don't think, yeah, but honestly, it really depends on how you phrase it on your personal statement. If you phrase it kind of, oh, I've realized through my own experiences with mental health, or like from my friends' experience with mental health, how much mental health affects the person as a whole, and then you go more in depth about how that experience led you to realize why you wanted to become a medical director, then I think it will turn out well. When you say you want to become a surgeon, I would actually avoid that in your personal statement. The reason why is because a lot of medical students, when they're going through the process of rotations and clinicals, and when they apply for residency, oftentimes people will switch their specialties about like 3 times, mostly because you're exposed to so much more than what you can be exposed now, that people will switch specialties all the time. So when you're writing your personal statement, never ever say like, I want to be this 100%. Your personal statement should be just a tiny bit more broad. It should just be more focused about you as a person and why you have the passion to go into the medical field. So don't ever say like, I want to become surgeon 100%, or like, I want to become ER doctor 100%. While for me, I did mention my experiences in the emergency room, I never ever talked about how I wanted to become, like I have to become a medical director or an emergency doctor. Hopefully that was able to help.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Let me know if you guys have any more questions. So as of now, looks like there's no questions in the chat. I can try to think of some tips. The other day I did a podcast and oh yes, I have a tip. This is a golden tip. In the podcast that I was in the other day, I mentioned similarly about networking and secondaries. So a good way to make yourself stand out when it comes to secondaries is to network with the students that currently go to that school. So what I mean is, let's say you are applying for University of Chicago Med School. In almost all medical school secondaries, one of the prompts will say, why University of Chicago? Like, why our school? A lot of people make the mistake of just Googling University of Chicago Med School, looking at the first page, being like, oh yeah, they have that program, or like, oh, their mission is this, cool, I'm just gonna write about that. But that's so broad, you know? That shows the school nothing. It doesn't tell them that you're actually passionate about going to that school. So a good way to make yourself stand out when it comes to secondaries is finding people who go to that school, either through like their Instagram or like Facebook. You have to do some kind of social media stalking, or like if you know a friend of a friend or something who goes to that school, find them online and then ask them questions that way. Like be like, oh, do you mind if I talk to you about your experience at that school? Whatever. And then when you write that secondary, you can mention like, I've actually reached out to a medical student from your school, and they said this, this, and this, and I really vibe, or I really relate to what this person said. I believe that my personality or my characteristics or my experiences really relate to whatever the student said. That really makes you stand out, because it really shows how like you took the extra step, you know, like you took that extra step to find somebody who went to that school. And because of that, like you will seem so much more appealing to that school. When they read that, they're like, oh my God, they actually really really want to go to the school. They're so interested. Let's interview him or her. So that's one golden tidbit that you probably won't hear from many people. Don't tell anybody, shh, you know. Okay, I have a request to mention a little bit about the MCAT. I'll answer the question on the MCAT before I continue on. So Natalie will be after. Okay, so the MCAT for me, I took it after I graduated undergrad. So a lot of people like to take it during their senior year, and they ask me like, why didn't you take it during senior year, or like whatever. For me personally, because it's situational. For me, my grades were not, you know, they weren't popping, like I showed you before. So I actually wanted to focus purely on my grades while I was still in undergrad. And then after I graduated, then I could spend my time, the gap year, to focus 100% on the MCAT, right? Like I already put myself on such a disadvantage with my lower GPA from the beginning that I didn't want anything else to screw it up. Like I didn't want to have a mediocre MCAT score along with a mediocre GPA. Like that would just make my application so bad. So I took it, that's why I took it after I graduated. So I took a 2-month prep course. I poured my all into it. I treated it like a full-time job. Like I was studying, like pouring my heart and soul into the freaking test. I did well. I'll just tell you the score. I got a 511, which is not that great. But it was more than 510, so I was happy with it. And then because I got that done and out of the way, I was able to focus 100% on doing well in my graduate school program. All right. So Natalie, what was your question?
I was just curious, what was the podcast that you were recently on? That was my first question. And then my second query was if you had any tips towards students. Like I'm currently a community college student. I'll be transferring soon. And I am being thrown into like the application process. So I was wondering if there's any tips that you would suggest for students like me who are looking almost as if we're freshmen again, looking into schools to see, because I've been looking at schools that also have a medical school as well, like Boston University. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions or any tips, especially since the community college that I go to doesn't have those resources and research and just those connections in general. So I was wondering if you
I don't really have any specific tips, but I feel like your approach towards this is good. So yes, I think it's valuable for you to find a school that has labs and things like that. I don't think it's necessary to find a school that has a med school. For me personally, coming from somebody who went to a public school, UCSD, and then going to a private grad school, I realized that I actually benefited way more from a private school. Granted, it was super expensive, but it gave me so many more opportunities. Like I was able to do like rare disease research. Like I was able to work with pharmaceutical companies. I worked with a public health startup. I got to start another public health org, and I got to work as the pre-med teaching assistant, and I still did ER scribe and things like that. And then all of those things I definitely would not have been able to get in a public school environment, because I tried to get so many research positions while I was at UCSD, and it was so hard. Like everyone was just like competing for like 1 or 2 spots. It was really difficult. So just keep that in mind when you're applying for different 4-year universities. I would try to see if you could look online or like ask friends and things like that to gauge like the overall feel of that school community before you apply. And then try to go to something that aligns with like your personality a little bit more. One of the reasons why I went to Keck Graduate Institute is because I had a friend who already went there, and then I like grilled like him super hard on like how to get, you know, extracurricular experience, research, blah blah blah. And then because he told me that it was more approachable to students, mostly because it was a smaller community, I was able to go there and make the most of my experience.
Thank you so much for your feedback.
Yeah, of course. Kimberly?
Hi. I don't know if you're able to answer this, but I'm in my third year now, and I just switched to pre-health concentration. I am a bit behind my required courses, and you think it would be okay if I apply still, and they understand that I would finish my required courses by the fourth year?
Yeah, of course. So they don't care like when you finish your prerequisites, as long as you finish it by the time you apply. So you don't have to worry about like the switching and whatever, as long as you fulfill the prerequisites and you do well. And of course you take the MCAT.
Yes, because my advisors won't let me take classes at another school. I don't know why, but someone told me I can still take it at another school, but it won't be applied to my degree, you know? So you think it would be okay to have two transcripts for one from a different school, as long as they're both the same thing, like they're both private universities?
Yeah, so I don't know why your advisors would say that. Granted, I've had pretty bad advisors myself.
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, you can take courses that fulfill the prerequisites from different universities. I did that. I took, I mean, granted, they weren't STEM, they were the humanities. Like you have to have some English and like some other humanities to apply for med school. And I didn't take all English classes while I was at UCSD. So I actually had to take English at Scripps College at Claremont. And then I just submitted the two transcripts that way. Like as long as it's another 4-year university, it's like, you know, a reputable university, there should be no problem.
Also, I have not done like shadowing hours and stuff, but you think I'm starting okay right now, since right now I'm doing work study at my school as a contact tracer? You think that would go good for right now?
I mean, yeah, it's fine. When it comes to shadowing, the amount of hours that you shower don't particularly matter as much. Just try to find shadowing experience because it is pretty valuable. But so far, because you have an experience going on for you right now, I feel like it's fine. Just try to find shadowing before you apply.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. Ryan?
Hi, so I had a question about your personal experience. So what did you think was the hardest aspect of transitioning from your undergrad and gap years to medical school, apart from like the increase in information, of course?
From my undergrad to grad school, or so not including grad school, from undergrad to med school.
I mean, I guess you can include grad school too, but just like the jump to medical school.
Well, I mean, like you guys probably already know, it's extremely hard. They relate it to like trying to drink water out of a fire hose. And at first I didn't understand until I'm here. And yes, you basically learn everything. Like I basically learned everything from my 4 years of UCSD in like 2 weeks. And it was horrible. Yeah, it's very hard. What's difficult? So what I appreciate about having my experience in the gap years and at grad school before I went to med school was that I was able to figure out what study methods worked best for me before I started in medical school. That way I could hit the ground running, right? A lot of people who take gap years but have not studied for many years or a long time, and they go from undergrad to med school, they have to figure out how to study again. So the first couple tests were like really bad for them. I guess in terms of a psychologic sense, you will encounter imposter syndrome, like severe imposter syndrome. Like I will often, many a times, be like in class or like just doing doctoring or something. I'm like, bro, I'm not good enough for this. Like, oh my God. But no, this med school chose you for a reason, and you need to constantly remind yourself that like you, all the work that you put in all your years of pre-med and applying for med school, interviewing, and then getting into med school is because of your hard work alone. So that's also something that I've had to come to terms with. That was actually a huge problem for me when I transitioned from undergrad into med school.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I have a follow-up on that. So I'm planning on taking a gap year and just like working in like clinical positions, and not taking like classes or anything. So do you have any advice on how to keep like my mental acuity up during that time?
That's a really good question. Let me think. I think if it's possible, I mean, it's difficult because of COVID and things like that. I would try to see if you can find a research position alongside with your clinical things. So not a lab research though, just try to see if you can find something that's more of a literary review. I was involved with a lot of literary review projects where we would try to write papers based off of other people's publications. And that actually really helped me maintain my ability to read, scientific papers. It kept my mental acuity up. And I really appreciated that experience. At the time, it sucked. Like, I hate reading, but it paid off in the end. So if it's possible for you, if you have the time, I would try to find a position. Otherwise, if you don't have the time to find a position or you can't find any, honestly, just staying up to date to like current medical, like news or like new publications is a really good way for you to still stay relevant, because by the time you go into medical school, the medical school education is changing often based off of the new discoveries that we're finding. So that's something that you could also try to keep in mind as well.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay. Oh no, it looks like Ariela's, I hope I pronounced it right, her question was answered. So I think that's everybody's questions for now. All right, so it's almost been an hour. So I'd just like to thank you guys so much for coming through and listening to my presentation and asking all those wonderful questions. It was honestly really fun. Like, I love sharing my experiences and I love being a mentor. If I would really appreciate it if you guys have social media, to just follow me on social media, on my social media handles. That's honestly like the biggest thank you could give me. And also, if you follow me, you'll be able to DM me with any questions. Like, I'm always open for your pre-med related questions. It might take me a couple business days to get back to them because med school is difficult, but I'll always try to get back to it as soon as possible. So if you're interested, my medical related Instagram is Maxine. My TikTok is also Maxine as well. Try to download it before Sunday because Trump is supposedly taking it off in the App Store and stuff like that. So try to download that if you want. And then my personal, if you're interested in my personal life, my personal Instagram is Maxine.
Thank you so much, Maxine, for being with us today. Your advice was so helpful. And thank you to everyone who participated.
Of course. Thank you guys so much. It was so much fun.